There was a time I thought silence was safer than truth. It wrapped around me like a wool coat in winter, coarse, a little too tight, but better than the cold judgment that waited, if I dared speak plainly. My name is Evelyn Grant, and for most of my married life, I was seen more as a fixture than a person. The wife. The one who couldn't give them what they wanted most. "She's barren," my mother-in-law once said, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. It was at a Christmas party, the kind where the fireplace was more for show than warmth. I was arranging appetizers, my hands trembling as I placed cheese cubes just so, as if symmetry could stave off the ache of being seen as less. Infertility wasn't a diagnosis I wore with shame. Not at first. My body simply didn't cooperate with expectation. Years of tests, prayers, disappointment. Then came the whispers. Then the quiet pity. Then the blame. My husband, Nathan, tried, at first. He sat beside me during appointments, brought home flowers after bad news. But sympathy faded. His mother's voice was always in his ear, sharp as cracked porcelain. "You're wasting your youth," she'd hiss. "Get a real woman who can make you a father." He never defended me. Not once. I stayed, because leaving would have been another failure to them. And I wasn't ready, then, to face the world on my own. But life has a strange way of opening hidden doors when every visible one slams shut. It started with a part-time job at the local library, just to get out of the house, to be somewhere my name was known without contempt. That's where I met Alice. 12 years old. Haunted eyes. Always in the fiction aisle, always pretending to read. The first time I asked if she needed help, she flinched. Like I was a storm she expected. Over time, I learned her story. Foster care, for homes in 3 years, no family willing to try again. I didn't make promises. I just showed up. Week after week, I was her calm, her constant. And she became mine. A year later, I asked if she wanted to come home with me, just for the weekend, to start. Nathan didn't object. He barely noticed. Alice never left. There was no grand adoption ceremony. No baby shower or social media post. Just a quiet shift. A toothbrush in my bathroom. Her laughter in my hallways. Her arms around me, calling me Eve. Then, months later, Mom. Then came Jamal. And then Elsie. They were older, too. Hard to place, the agency said. Damaged. But I knew better. They just hadn't been seen. So I saw them. I raised them on love and structure and late-night talks on the couch. I taught them how to iron a shirt, how to speak without apology, how to hold their pain without letting it rot their hearts. I gave them my name. But I didn't tell my husband's family. Not yet. Not until I was ready. And then, one day, that readiness came. It was a Wednesday. Nathan's mother invited us to dinner, a birthday celebration for his sister, though really, it was just another excuse for her to parade her successful family, their beautiful children, their Instagram-perfect lives. I RSVP'd with a simple note. There will be 5 of us. Nathan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. By then, he lived mostly in his office, his world reduced to spreadsheets and silence. We were roommates, not partners. I didn't mind. I had already found my family. That evening, I dressed with intention, nothing flashy, but proud. I wore a blue wrap dress Alice had chosen, the one she said made me look like a movie star who's also a warrior. Jamal wore his pressed shirt and tie. Elsie insisted on braiding her hair with silver threads. When we arrived, the dining room was its usual theater of expectations. Glass chandeliers, fine china, small talk sharp as crystal edges. My mother-in-law barely glanced up as we walked in. "Who are these?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Before I could speak, Alice stepped forward. She was almost 18 now, taller than me, composed like a queen. "Hi, I'm Alice Grant. This is my brother Jamal and our sister Elsie. And Evelyn is our mom," she added, as if it were the most obvious truth in the room. My mother-in-law's glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile like a gunshot. Silence followed. Utter, glorious silence. "You like surprises, don't you?" I said, smiling gently as I knelt to pick up the shards. There was the moment I'd waited for. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just recognition. That she had underestimated me. That her words hadn't broken me. That I had built a life while she was busy trying to destroy one. There's a sound that lives in your bones once you've heard it. The unmistakable crack of glass against tile. It wasn't just a wine goblet that shattered beneath my mother-in-law's hand that night. It was the illusion she had so carefully nurtured. The fantasy that I was the barren one, the unfulfilled, the incomplete. For years, I had let her believe that. I had even let Nathan believe it, if I'm honest. There's a strange kind of armor in invisibility. You learn to wear it, to move silently through the lives of people who have decided who you are before you even open your mouth. But the moment Alice called me Mom in that crowded, candlelit room, it was like stepping into the sun after years underground. I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. I let the truth sit there like a cathedral in the middle of their sterile banquet. Nathan looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in years. "I didn't know you were fostering again," he said slowly, his voice uncertain, as though he were testing each word for poison. "We're not Foster's," Jamal said, his tone calm but resolute. "We're hers." My mother-in-law finally found her voice. It came out brittle, like lace left too long in the sun. "3? You adopted 3 children without telling anyone." I met her gaze without blinking. "I didn't adopt them to tell you. I adopted them because they needed me. And I needed them." She blinked fast, probably to stop herself from saying what I knew was fighting to rise in her throat. Something about bloodlines. About inheritance. About who counted and who didn't. Instead, she turned to Nathan, as if he still held authority in a story he'd long abandoned. "You let her do this?" she demanded. He shrugged, looking at the children and then at me, as though he were seeing ghosts materialize in real time. "It's her life," he muttered. I guess she didn't need my permission. It was a pathetic deflection, but also a subtle confession. He had checked out long ago, and I had finally stopped waiting for him to check back in. The room began to murmur, cousins whispering, sisters-in-law exchanging tight smiles over brie and crackers. I heard someone say scandal and another mutter charity case. But my children stood tall beside me, unmoved. I reached for a cloth napkin and began picking up the glass shards. Not because I had to, but because I'd spent my life cleaning up messes no one else would claim. Elsie knelt beside me, her small hands reaching for the larger pieces. "You don't have to, baby," I whispered. She looked up, her brown eyes unwavering. "I know. I want to." That's when I felt the first tear sneak down my cheek. Not from sadness. From being seen. When we finally sat down at the long mahogany table, the air was thick with unsaid things. My mother-in-law poured herself a second glass of wine, her hand still trembling slightly. No one spoke for a long while, the clatter of cutlery the only sound filling the silence I had created. It was delicious. "You always were full of surprises," she said eventually, her voice low but loaded. I smiled. "You've no idea." The dinner moved on in fits and starts, as if the table itself was trying to remember how to behave. Someone made a weak joke about the roast. A cousin asked if Jamal played sports. My sister-in-law complimented Elsie's braid. But no one dared mention what hung like thunderclouds above the heirloom chandelier: me. My children. The unraveling of their narrative. For years, I had existed at this table like a ghost in pearls. Smiling, serving, swallowing back every ache. But tonight, I was undeniable. A woman no longer contorted to fit the narrow outlines of their approval. I saw the questions forming behind their eyes, even if they dared not voice them. Where did she find them? When did this happen? Why didn't we know? But they weren't ready for answers. Not the kind I was willing to give. Because those answers began in a nursery that was never used. It was the third bedroom in our house. Painted pale green with ivory trim, soft lighting, and a rocking chair I had sanded and stained myself. I used to sit there at night, the mobile spinning above the crib, a silent lullaby for a child who would never arrive. That room broke me. Every cycle of hope and heartbreak, every month marked by silence instead of symptoms, etched itself into those walls. There were nights I would curl up on the rug, fists clenched against my chest, begging God or fate or whoever might listen to not make me go through another test, another waiting room, another maybe next time. Nathan stopped coming with me after year 2. By year 4, he barely spoke about it at all. Eventually, I stopped hoping. Stopped counting days. Stopped pretending that love alone could summon life into a reluctant womb. Instead, I closed the door. And then, I opened another one. It was Alice who cracked me back open. She had that quiet kind of grief, the kind you only learn after being passed from hand to hand like unwanted luggage. She didn't speak much the first few weeks. She barely ate. But she watched. God, did she watch? She noticed everything. I remember the first time she laughed, really laughed. I had tripped over a laundry basket, flailed like a cartoon character, and landed in a pile of warm socks. She had tried to hide her giggle at first, but when I joined in, something broke open in her, and she laughed until she cried. After that, it was like the sun began creeping into our lives again, slowly but surely. With Jamal, it was different. He was guarded, toughened by disappointment. But he had a mind sharp as a blade and a heart he didn't yet know how to use. I saw myself in him, the way he checked exits in every room, how he never sat with his back to a door. He called me ma'am for the first 6 months, but one night, after I bandaged his skinned knee and told him a story about my own childhood scars, he mumbled Mom on his way upstairs. He didn't know I heard. I never told him I cried. And Elsie, she was sunlight. Unapologetic, messy, loud in the most beautiful ways. She clung to me from the beginning, like she'd already decided I was hers long before the paperwork did. They filled the silence the nursery left behind. Not with noise, but with meaning. I didn't tell anyone about them, not Nathan, not his family, not even my own parents. I wanted to build something sacred, free from their scrutiny. I wanted to love without permission. So I did. And now here we were, seated at the same table where I'd once been told I'd never understand real motherhood. Watching my children politely slice their chicken and sip sparkling water, utterly unbothered by the hushed stares. I reached for my wine, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken triumphs. Let them stare. Let them wonder. Let them sit in the echoes of a woman they thought they knew. Because tonight, I was rewriting the story. Dinner came and went, as all things do. Plates were cleared by those too polite to excuse themselves and too curious to flee. My mother-in-law's attempts to regain control came in the form of tight smiles and sharper wine pours, her voice pitched just above casual, as if pretending none of this mattered could undo its weight. But nothing could unring this bell. After dessert, a lemon tart made by the housekeeper, but paraded as her own, the men drifted to the den, and the children, sensing a rhythm older than them, offered to help with dishes. They were raised with grace, but not subservience. I knew their offer was a kindness, not compliance. I remained at the table. My sister-in-law Lindsay slid into the seat beside me. Her perfume was cloying, floral, insistent. "They're lovely," she said, nodding toward the kitchen. "Really? But why now?" There it was. The question pressed behind every raised eyebrow and cautious compliment. Why reveal them now? Why tonight? I sipped my water before answering. Because this dinner was always a test. A reminder of where I fell short. Of what I didn't bring to the table. I decided to change the terms. She blinked. "You think this is about you?" "Oh, Lindsay." I smiled. "Everything in this house has always been about me when I fail. But never when I rise." She shifted, uncomfortable, and I didn't push further. She wasn't cruel, not like the others. Just complicit. The truth was, this family didn't dislike me, they dismissed me. Their judgment came not with slurs or shouts, but with the steady erosion of belief. The endless expectation that I would remain small, agreeable, quietly grateful to orbit their glory. I had accepted that role for too long. Because when you're starved of praise, even scraps of acknowledgement feel like feasts. Until you learn to feed yourself. Nathan emerged from the den, drink in hand. His face carried the weight of someone whose choices had finally circled back. He stood beside me for a beat, as if to speak, then thought better of it and walked away. It struck me, then, how little I needed from him now. I had built something in the dark. Something real. Not just a family, but a fortress. Later, as coats were collected and cheeks kissed with strained civility, my mother-in-law approached again. Her eyes were glassy, her breath tinged with Chardonnay. "I suppose you think you've made your point," she said, voice low and venomous. I looked her in the eye. This was never about proving anything to you. This was about reclaiming what was mine all along. "And what's that?" she sneered. "My story." Alice appeared beside me, sliding her arm through mine like it had always belonged there. "Are we ready, Mom?" I didn't have to answer. The word itself had already dismantled every lie they'd ever told about me. We left through the front door, our heads held high, into a night cold with winter's breath, but warm with something truer. And behind us, in that grand old house where lineage meant more than love, the story began to change. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with presence. The car ride home was quiet, but not the brittle silence I used to know. It was the comfortable kind, the kind that hums with the echo of shared victories and unspoken understanding. Jamal sat in the front seat beside me, scrolling through his phone, earbuds in. In the back, Alice and Elsie leaned into one another, already half asleep, their braids tangled like roots of the same tree. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently on the edge of the gearshift. My fingers trembled just slightly, not from fear, but from the release that follows years of bracing. For so long, I had walked through that family's world like a guest on borrowed time. A wife by title. A woman dismissed not for what I'd done, but for what I hadn't been able to give them. And yet tonight, I had taken up space. Not through fury or spectacle, but simply by existing fully, with nothing to hide. My phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Another followed before I'd even reached the stoplight at Ash and Marion. "I didn't know they meant that much to you." That one made me laugh. Softly, sadly. He'd lived in the same house, sat at the same table, passed the same plates, and still failed to see what grew right under his roof. They weren't accessories to a lonely woman's need. They were my children. He'd once asked me what love felt like, back in our early years when we were all questions and no bruises. I remember answering, "It feels like gravity. Unseen, but everything depends on it." I hadn't felt that gravity in our marriage for a long time, but I felt it in Alice's hand on mine when she had her first panic attack. In the way Jamal lingered in doorways until I gave him a nod that meant it was safe to exhale. In the way Elsie always left a corner of her blanket folded for me when I tucked her in. That was love. Quiet. Constant. Unmistakable. When we got home, the kids filtered inside without a word. Our house wasn't big or new, but it was ours. The kind of place where mismatched mugs sat beside heirloom plates and every corner held a memory not curated, but earned. I hung up my coat, stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror. Still me, but not the version they remembered. This one had survived. This one had claimed her children, her voice, her story. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Nathan. "Why didn't you tell me?" I typed, then erased, then typed again. "Because you stopped listening long before I stopped speaking." I hit send. The next morning, Alice made pancakes, burned at the edges, but sweet in the middle. Jamal fixed the leaky faucet without being asked. Elsie danced in the hallway, still wearing last night's dress and a paper crown she made from napkin rings. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own life, That morning, while Elsie colored dragons at the kitchen table and Alice reread one of her poetry books, I found myself standing in front of the fridge, holding the glass dish that contained the leftover lemon tart. The same tart my mother-in-law had commissioned and claimed as her own. I stared at it, the pristine wedge still nestled in its cut corner like a lie that hadn't quite been consumed. I closed the fridge. I didn't need any more of their offerings, even in sugar form. Jamal walked in, his socks silent on the tile. He eyed the tart too. "You should throw that out," he said. "I was thinking the same thing," I replied. We stood there for a beat, mother and son, silent in that way we had both learned from the past. He had the kind of soul that had grown older than his body, wisdom etched into his quietness. I'd once found a notebook of his, filled with statistics about racial disparities in education and pages of questions scrawled in the margins. Not homework. Just curiosity. Just aching to know why the world bent more easily for others. He had survived too much, and yet here he was. Whole enough to care. Kind enough to speak with tenderness. "You think they'll reach out again?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I thought of Nathan's messages, the way his mother's face had twisted into something primal when I said, "my children." The way people like her process change, not through growth, but through control. "They might," I said finally. "But that doesn't mean we have to let them in." He nodded. Then he added, "You don't owe them anything." And there it was. The thing I had waited most of my adult life to hear. Not from Nathan. Not from my in-laws. But from the boy who had once called me ma'am with distance in his eyes and now saw me clearer than anyone ever had. Later that day, Alice asked if she could go to the library. Not the one near our house, but the old one downtown with the stained glass windows and worn carpet that smelled like forgotten stories. It was a place she loved. The same place we had met all those years ago. I knew what she was doing. Revisiting the beginning. The place where I became her anchor and she became mine. "I'll come with you," I said. We didn't talk much on the drive. Sometimes, memory is loud enough on its own. She walked straight to the chair where she used to sit, back when she was just a shadow of a girl trying to disappear into the pages. She touched the armrest with reverence, then looked up at me. "I used to hate this chair," she said. "But I sat here anyway, because it was near the window." "Why the window?" I asked gently. "In case I needed to run." She said it so plainly, so matter-of-fact, that my heart twisted. "I never ran," she added, her voice softer now. "Because you came." I didn't respond. Just reached for her hand. That was the thing about love, real love. It didn't always need words. It didn't need announcements or acknowledgments. It just needed presence. Over and over again. She smiled at me. "Thanks for making them hear it last night." "It wasn't about them hearing," I said. "It was about you knowing." The library gave Alice what she needed. Not books that afternoon, but closure. We left with no checkouts, just the quiet satisfaction of revisiting the beginning and walking out by choice. That night, I pulled out the ring. The one Nathan gave me the summer we were both 24, beneath a sky that we mistook for a promise. Back then, we had believed in soft beginnings and unshakable futures. He was all ambition and charm. I was hope wrapped in uncertainty, aching to be chosen and afraid I never truly would be. The ring was beautiful, an heirloom, his mother had proudly told me. Platinum band, antique setting, a diamond with edges worn smooth like it had seen too many lives. I had worn it every day for 11 years, even through the grief, the distance, the slow unraveling. Even when I began to raise children without him. Even when I realized I was more mother than wife. Even when he stopped seeing me altogether. But now it felt like wearing someone else's memory. I placed it on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. It caught the moonlight like it wanted to confess something. I let it sit there. I didn't need to throw it away, nor did I need to cling. It just needed to stop belonging to me. The next morning, I told the children what I'd done. Alice noticed first, scanning my left hand as she passed me the milk. Her eyes flicked to the window, where the ring still rested. She didn't say a word, just nodded. She understood better than anyone what it meant to lay something down. Jamal, ever direct, asked, "Are you getting a divorce?" "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "Maybe I already have." Because the leaving isn't always announced. Sometimes it begins in silence, in missed birthdays, in meals eaten apart, in dreams quietly buried because you've grown tired of defending them. Sometimes it's not one moment, it's all of them, stacked like stones until they form a wall neither of you bothers to climb anymore. Elsie didn't say much. She just hugged me that morning a little longer than usual, her chin resting against my shoulder, her breath warm on my neck. She had known loss in other forms. She could feel what was shifting. That day, I cleaned the nursery. Not because I needed it anymore, not for cribs or mobiles or the ghosts of plans never realized, but because it had waited long enough to become something else. I boxed up the remnants of its original purpose, the pale green blankets, the books on newborn care, the stuffed animals with untouched tags. I placed them gently in a storage bin, not with sorrow, but with reverence. Then I opened the window, let in the sun, and repainted the walls with the children. We chose burnt orange and dusky blue. Not soft, but strong. Not gendered, but bold. It became a study, a reading room, a space to breathe. Jamal set up his desk in the corner. Alice stocked the shelves. Elsie covered the far wall in drawings of things she wanted to see, dinosaurs and dresses, mountains that could talk, a giraffe with glasses. That night, we all sat on the rug with pizza and music, and for the first time in years, the room felt alive. Reclaimed. Rewritten. Not a monument to what never came, but a celebration of what finally had. When the sun set that evening, it spilled gold across the newly painted walls like a benediction. The nursery turned sanctuary breathed with new life, and for a moment, I sat in the center of it all, stunned by the absence of ache. It was like hearing silence after a storm. But healing isn't linear. And ghosts don't leave just because you tell them to. Later that night, I found myself back in the attic, an old habit, like picking a scab just to see if it still hurts. The boxes up there were a museum of my first marriage, wedding gifts still in their wrapping, old photo albums carefully curated to look like joy, and letters, so many letters, from a time when Nathan and I still believed words could stitch the broken parts of us together. I sat cross-legged on the floor, the insulation prickling my skin, and opened one of the boxes labeled Hope. That's what I'd called it once. Inside were the adoption pamphlets I had hidden from Nathan after our third failed IVF cycle. The ones I read by flashlight at 2 a.m. when my hope refused to die. He hadn't wanted to consider adoption. Said it wasn't the same. That he needed his own blood. Those words had gutted me at the time. As if love required DNA. As if a child wasn't yours until they mirrored your jawline or inherited your allergies. But I had stopped arguing long before I stopped caring. Some fights are over before they begin. And yet, in the quiet up there, surrounded by old decisions and stale dust, I felt a flicker of that old sadness. Not regret. Just grief. The kind you learn to live beside, like a neighbor who never leaves but occasionally mows your lawn when you're too tired. Downstairs, I could hear Alice humming softly in her room. Jamal's low voice reading aloud to Elsie. Their world had grown roots in my home, weaving through floorboards and settling into the very architecture. They didn't come from me, but they had come to me, and I had chosen them, over and over again. I closed the box gently, sealing the old stories in their rightful place, not erased, but no longer ruling me. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. Again. Mom wants to meet with you. Alone. Says she wants to clear the air. I stared at the message for a long time, the glow of the screen painting my face pale in the dark. Clear the air? She didn't know how. Her lungs ran on superiority, not sincerity. But maybe, just maybe, it was time. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because some ghosts you don't wait to vanish. You face them, eye to eye, and tell them what they've refused to hear. I typed back. I'll come. But not to apologize. And I meant IT. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon when I stood again at the doorstep of the Grant estate, my breath curling in front of me like smoke from an old flame. The wrought iron gate clicked behind me with the finality of a sealed chapter. I hadn't returned since that dinner, the one where glass shattered and truths were spoken without apology. My mother-in-law, Celeste, opened the door herself. That, in itself, was strange. She hadn't opened a door for anyone in years. There were always assistants, staff, someone else to smooth the world before it touched her. She wore her usual uniform, soft cashmere, perfectly applied lipstick, eyes like frosted glass. "Evelyn," she said with a clipped nod. "Come in." I stepped inside. The air smelled of expensive flowers and something sour beneath the surface, something hidden too long. She led me not to the formal sitting room, but to the solarium. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows, dappling the floor with warmth. It felt like a set, curated for peace. Deception came dressed in orchids. Tea was already poured. I waited until we both sat before speaking. "You wanted to talk." She adjusted a napkin in her lap. "I wanted to understand." I laughed once, quiet and sharp. "You never cared to before." Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. "You blindsided this family." "No," I said evenly. "You ignored what you couldn't control." "That's different." She stirred her tea with too much precision. "Why didn't you tell us that you had children?" "They're not an accessory," I replied. "They're not a milestone or a project. They're people. People who didn't need to be judged before they were even seen." Silence settled between us like old dust. Then she said, carefully, "They're not grants." Thank God for that. The words left my mouth before I could soften them. But I didn't take them back. "You always wanted to measure me," I continued. "To weigh my worth in family tradition and biological success. You couldn't see beyond your own image." "I tried, Celeste. I tried for years to be what you needed. But I wasn't empty, I was overflowing, just not in ways you valued." Her hand trembled slightly as she set her spoon down. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know what you were carrying." "Because you never asked," I said. "You only inspected." And there it was the moment she looked away. Her armor cracked, but not crumbled. "I raised 3 children," I added, voice low but firm. "I sat with them through night terrors, doctor visits, broken hearts, and silent battles they couldn't name. I taught them how to trust again. I watched them grow into people who will never need to hurt others to feel important." I leaned forward. "That's motherhood, whether or not you approve." She stared into her cup, the steam long gone. "Will you bring them again?" she asked after a long pause. "To another dinner?" I stood. "No. Not yet. Maybe not ever." I walked to the door without waiting for her response. Because forgiveness is not a door I walk through simply because someone asks. It's one I choose to build, brick by brick, when I know they'll meet me there not with pride, but with humility. The sun hit my face as I stepped outside. It was warmer than it had been in weeks, and inside my chest, something unclenched. Not for her. For me. When I returned home that evening, the house was alive with sound. Elsie was in the living room performing what she claimed was a Shakespearean ballet, Jamal was correcting her pronunciation mid-spin, and Alice was halfway through a tray of brownies she'd said were for a school event, but clearly weren't making it past dinner. It struck me how much love had quietly saturated these walls. It didn't demand recognition or parade itself in public. It just existed, day after day, in noise and in stillness, in inside jokes and mismatched socks. Elsie tackled me at the door, her arms flung around my waist. "You smell like old people and flowers," she announced. I laughed. "You're not far off." We made dinner together, a haphazard pasta creation topped with far too much cheese and laughter. But in the quiet moments between stirring and seasoning, I thought about the meeting with Celeste. Her question kept echoing, "Will you bring them again?" There was something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Not affection, not yet, but something adjacent to curiosity. And maybe, under layers of frost, the earliest twitch of remorse. I told myself not to hold my breath. But I also knew something had shifted. Nathan didn't message that night. The silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. He was retreating into his usual fortress of avoidance, unsure of how to reclaim a place he had vacated long ago. And I wasn't rushing to coax him back. I had stopped bending. Later, after the kids had gone to bed and the dishes had been abandoned in the sink, I found myself standing in the dining room. The same room that once held so much expectation, so much weight. We hadn't used it much since the early years of our marriage. It had become a kind of museum, more for display than purpose. But that night, I cleared the table. I pulled out a stack of old linens from the cabinet, some gifted, some bought during better years. I lit candles not for ambience, but for presence. I wanted to see the room in a new light, to reclaim it as more than a stage for judgment. Alice walked in quietly, barefoot, eyes soft with questions. "What's this for?" "A new beginning," I said simply. She nodded. "Can I help?" We set 4 places. Nothing fancy, just real. And the next evening we ate there together. No special occasion. No guests. Just us. For people bound not by blood, but by choice. And as we passed dishes and stories in seconds, the air felt lighter. I caught Jamal glancing around between bites. "What?" I asked. He shrugged. "It just feels good in here now." I smiled. "That's because we made it ours." It was a week after the dinner, and the days had returned to their rhythm: school drop-offs, lunch packing, the daily dance of errands, and small victories. The ring still sat on the windowsill, untouched. I hadn't moved it. It didn't haunt me. It just sat there, like a question I had already answered. Then, one quiet Thursday morning, there was a knock at the door. Not hurried, not hesitant, just steady. I opened it to find Nathan. He looked older somehow, not in years, but in the kind of where a person accumulates when they've lost something they only now realize mattered. His coat was unzipped. His eyes held a storm. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside, not to welcome him back, but to let truth have room. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had spent years waiting for connection. Where I had laid out dinners he often ate without tasting. Where silence became our shared language. "I didn't know," he said, finally. "About them. About you." "You didn't ask," I replied, pouring tea but not offering him any. He didn't touch the cup in front of him. "I wasn't ready," he continued, "to give up on the way I thought life was supposed to be." "Then you never really saw me," I said. "Because I gave up waiting for that version a long time ago. And in that space, I found something better." He looked down, hands folded. "They're amazing. Your kids. I mean, our kids." He was trying. I saw it. The way a man tries when the ground beneath him has shifted and he's scrambling to prove he deserves a second foothold. "They're mine," I said softly. "You're welcome to get to know them. But they're not yours by default. That ship sailed when you stepped away from the dock." He winced. "I came to say I'm sorry," he said. "Thank you," I replied. "But I didn't need it. I needed presence. Then. When they were hurting. When I was building a life from pieces you didn't care to see." He nodded. Slowly. A man who had once held power and now understood how little it had been worth. Before he left, he paused at the door. "I saw the ring," he said. "I get it." I didn't reply. Because sometimes, silence isn't empty. It's full of everything you've finally stopped explaining. After he left, I stood by the window for a long time. Watching. Not for him, but for what came next. And when I turned around, I saw Elsie in the hallway, watching too. "Was that your husband?" she asked. I nodded. She came close and took my hand. "Did he say sorry?" "Yes." She tilted her head. "Did it help?" "A little," I said. "But it didn't fix anything." "That's okay," she said wisely. "Some things get better because we grow, not because they change." And just like that, a 10-year-old reminded me why I chose them. Why I would choose them again. Every day. Forever. 2 days later, a cream-colored envelope arrived, slid through the mail slot with the same elegance that had always cloaked this family's manipulations and civility. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, restrained, proud. It was from Celeste. Inside was an invitation. Not another dinner. Not some formal reconciliation event. Just a tea. For the women of the family, it read. It didn't say we'd love to have you. It didn't say bring your daughters. It didn't say we were wrong. It said tea. As if our fractured history could be steeped and sweetened. I set the card down on the counter and let it sit beside the ring. Alice found it later that afternoon. She read it without touching it, as if the paper might burn. They want you back, she said. Or at least, the version of you they can explain. I didn't answer right away. She was right, of course. The invitation wasn't about belonging. It was about restoring their control. About pulling me back into the frame they'd already chosen for me. You're not going, are you? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Jamal looked up from his homework at the table. They didn't invite us. Of course not, Alice said. They'd have to admit we exist first. The ache of that truth settled over us like dusk. Elsie, who had been coloring in the corner, suddenly stood and marched over to the counter. With the authority only children possess when they still believe justice is simple, she picked up the envelope and placed it in the trash. There, she said. Now it's gone. We laughed, not because it wasn't true, but because sometimes laughter is the only way to keep from crying. I retrieved it later that night, not to respond, but to remember. To remind myself that some bridges aren't burned in rage. Some are simply walked away from, overgrown and forgotten, until they're no longer a path but a relic. That evening we had a tea of our own. I pulled out my mismatched mugs, the ones I loved. We brewed chamomile and honey, the kind that soothed rather than impressed. I brought out old shortbread cookies and let Elsie arrange them into constellations. We sat together at the table that had once known so much silence. And we talked about everything, school, dreams, old fears we'd now outgrown. And when the tea cooled, Alice raised her cup. To the women of this family, she said. We clinked mugs, soft ceramic against ceramic. Unfancy, unapologetic, unbreakable. Spring came late that year, reluctant and cautious, as if the earth itself wasn't quite sure it was safe to bloom. The first crocuses pushed through frostbitten soil like small acts of courage. And I understood them more than I ever had before. I spent a Saturday in the garden digging. Not to escape, but to return to myself. I had once planted lavender along the path out front, but it had been neglected during the years I spent chasing approval instead of peace. Now, with dirt beneath my nails and sun on my back, I felt something soften. Jamal joined me, not saying much. Just bringing out the compost without being asked, handing me tools, placing stones where he thought they should go. That was how he loved, quietly, precisely, present. I read about lavender, he said after a while. It repels things. Like bugs? I asked, wiping my brow. He nodded. And bad energy. I smiled. Then we should plant an entire hedge. He didn't laugh, but he gave me one of his rare, half-corner smiles. The kind that meant I get it, even if I'll never say it out loud. Elsie emerged from the house later with a painted sign that read, "The Chosen Garden." She'd drawn little hearts around the word chosen. I nailed it into the soil beside the first blooming sprigs. That evening, after showers and cocoa and a movie that Elsie insisted was the most important cinematic event of our time, it wasn't. I got another message. From Celeste. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you. I would like to meet your children on your terms. If that's something you'd allow. No date. No address. Just a message. Alice sat beside me when I read it. Do you believe her? She asked. No, I said softly. But I believe she wants to believe herself. Is that enough? Not yet. We sat in silence. Alice turned the teacup in her hand, watching the dregs settle like a fortune waiting to be read. What if she really tries? She asked. Then we'll see. She didn't press. Just leaned her head on my shoulder, like she did when she was younger, when love still had to be proven every day and she hadn't yet realized it had already taken root. Not all invitations come in envelopes. Some come in small acts. Honest apologies. Consistent effort. Showing up when it's hard. Until then, the garden would bloom. Without permission. And we would grow together. 2 weeks passed before I heard from Celeste again, and when I did, it wasn't a message or a knock, it was a letter. Handwritten. Heavy paper. A wax seal, because of course. I almost didn't open it. Part of me was wary of what it might say. Another part, the part that still remembered the sting of her voice through the years, braced for another well-dressed dismissal disguised as diplomacy. But I opened it anyway. It began simply. Evelyn. I was wrong. Not just about you. About everything I thought I knew about motherhood. About strength. About what it means to create a legacy. I don't expect forgiveness. But I would like a chance to understand the world you've built. To meet the people you've chosen. If not for me, then perhaps for them. So they can see how far the story has changed. With regret and hope. Celeste. I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. Not moved to tears, those had dried up in me a long time ago when it came to her. But I was struck by the shift in tone. Not prideful. Not polished. Just tired. Elsie was the one who asked first. Did the mean grandma write again? She did, I said. It was different this time. Alice raised an eyebrow. Different how? Like, actually real? Or just better written? I passed her the letter. She read it aloud slowly, careful not to stumble. When she finished, she set it down with a sigh. People can change, she said. But it doesn't mean they've earned you. That's what it came down to. Was regret enough? Or did healing require more than words? I told them we'd take our time. Later that afternoon, Jamal helped me rake the garden. The leaves were coming down early this year, nature shedding without apology. I don't think I want to meet her yet, he said. You don't have to. But I might one day, he added. If she keeps showing up. That was the thing about these kids, they weren't quick to trust. They had learned the cost of disappointment early. But they also knew that real love was shown in patterns, not gestures. We burned the dry leaves in the fire pit that night, the smoke curling into the sky like prayers we weren't sure would be answered. Alice threw in the envelope Celeste had sent, but not the letter. Some things we keep, she said. Just to remember how far we've come. I nodded. Some letters aren't about the sender. They're about who you become when you decide how to receive them. Sunday afternoons had become our sacred hours. No errands. No screens. Just us, together, reclaiming time. On this particular Sunday, I pulled down an old photo album, the kind I used to keep during the early years of my marriage, back when I still believed I was documenting a life that made sense. The pages stuck together slightly. Glossy smiles from parties, forced grins during vacations. Images of a woman I no longer recognized. Alice sat beside me, curious but quiet. Is this before me? She asked, her finger tapping the corner of a photograph of Nathan and me on our honeymoon. The background was all blue ocean and white sand, but we both looked stiff. Tired. Long before, I said. Before I knew what family really looked like. Jamal joined us next, followed by Elsie, still in her pajamas with syrup on her sleeve. We turned the pages together. When the album ended, I closed it gently and set it aside. We need new ones, Alice said. Albums. Of us. I've been thinking the same, I admitted. That's when Elsie, sticky-fingered and suddenly solemn, asked, when do we get new names? I looked at her. Our names are good, she said quickly, but people still ask. At school. Why ours don't match yours? I had always told them it didn't matter. That love wasn't measured in matching syllables. But I knew how the world worked, how people questioned what they couldn't immediately understand. Alice, older, nodded. I've been thinking about it too. I had filed the paperwork long ago. Quietly. Without fanfare. I didn't want to pressure them. I didn't want them to feel like they had to become something new to belong. But I had chosen them. and I had chosen to give them the option to choose me back. So I went to the drawer in my desk, the one I kept locked, and brought out 3 envelopes. "What are those?" Jamal asked, brow furrowing. "Your new names," I said, "if you want them. Nothing's final until you sign." The room fell still. Alice opened hers first. Her hand trembled, just slightly. She read the document, then looked up, eyes shining. "Grant," she whispered. "Alice Marie Grant." Jamal's breath caught in his throat when he saw his. Elsie squealed when I read hers aloud. "You mean I can really be Elsie Grant forever?" she asked. "You always were," I said. "Now it's just official." That night we had cake. Chocolate thick with frosting, because it was a celebration even if we were the only ones who understood it. I took a photo of the 3 of them, holding their papers like passports to a country they'd always lived in but could finally name. And I printed that photo. The first page of our new album. Weeks passed, and the letter from Celeste remained folded neatly in a drawer. Not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A line drawn in ink, not sand. One morning, while packing lunches, I asked the kids a question I hadn't before. "If she really wants to meet you on your terms, what would that look like?" Alice didn't hesitate. "Not in that house." Jamal shook his head. "Neutral ground. Somewhere she's not in charge." Elsie, ever literal, asked, "Like a park? Or a museum?" I smiled. "Like a garden." We chose the local botanical gardens, not too formal, not too crowded. A place where nature reminded everyone that growth doesn't ask for permission. Where flowers bloomed regardless of who admired them. I sent Celeste a message. "You asked to meet them. Sunday, 3 p.m. Botanical Gardens. If you come, come as a guest. Not a judge." She replied simply, "I'll be there." The day arrived warm and gentle, the sky a soft blue brushed with light. The kids dressed as they wanted, Alice in jeans and a blazer, Jamal in his lucky sneakers, Elsie in a sundress that twirled when she walked. I brought no script. No expectations. Just presence. Celeste arrived exactly on time, wearing muted colors and no jewelry, which for her was practically a costume. She looked smaller somehow. Not diminished, just less grand. As if she'd peeled back a few layers of armor. She walked toward us slowly. Alice stood beside me, arms crossed, but eyes watchful. Jamal's posture was closed. Elsie stayed near, her fingers entwined with mine. Celeste stopped a few feet away. "Thank you," she said, "for allowing this." I nodded. Then she knelt. To their level. Not with theatrics, but with intention. "I've been wrong," she said. "About your mother. And about what makes a family." Silence. Then Alice stepped forward. Not to forgive, but to engage. "Why now?" she asked. Celeste met her gaze. "Because it took me too long to understand what she built while I was too proud to see." Jamal didn't speak. But his shoulders eased, just a little. Elsie twirled once, then said, "Do you like gardens?" Celeste blinked. "I do." "Then come see ours," Elsie said, already walking ahead. I stayed back with Alice and Jamal as Elsie led her into the blooms. "You don't have to forgive her," I said. "I know," Alice said. "But maybe we let her try." Jamal nodded once. "On a short leash." I smiled. Boundaries. Not walls. That day, we didn't become something new. We just became clearer. Like soil turned over after the frost. Letting in light, that garden visit became a rhythm none of us expected. Not frequent. Not rehearsed. Just enough. Celeste came again 2 Sundays later. This time she brought a blanket and a small tin of cookies that Elsie immediately declared a little too lemony, but probably made with a good heart. We didn't speak of the past. Not directly. But healing has its own language, and sometimes it sounds like gentle questions, careful compliments, or a willingness to lose gracefully at Go Fish. It wasn't about replacing history. It was about making space beside it. One afternoon, as we sat beneath the willow tree near the back pond, Celeste turned to me with a look that didn't quite fit the face I remembered. "You were always steady," she said, softly. even when I tried to shake you. It was a kind of apology, shaped more like observation. I took it for what it was. No more, no less. You mistook my quiet for weakness, I replied. But it was the ground I stood on. She nodded. Jamal, who had spent most of the visit drawing in his sketchbook, glanced up. Are you going to come to our house sometime? It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge. Celeste answered carefully. Only if your mother says yes. The power of that moment struck me not because she deferred to me, but because my children saw it. A matriarch who once treated me as less, now recognizing where the authority in this family had shifted. Later that evening, back at home, Alice sat at the kitchen island, flipping through her notebook. I didn't think I'd like her, she said. And I don't. Not really. But I like how I feel when she listens. That was enough, for now. We didn't rush the next step. I didn't extend a dinner invitation. There were still rooms in my house that remembered too much, still corners of my soul that flinched at her laughter. But in the garden we were equals. Women. Wounded. Trying. I framed one of Jamal's drawings, a delicate ink sketch of the willow tree where Celeste had first knelt. It now hung in our living room. Not as tribute. As a reminder that even those who arrive late can still be part of the story, if they come in peace.